The American economy is no stranger to turbulence, but the first quarter of 2025 delivered a jolt that few saw coming. A 0.3% contraction in GDP, worse than any major forecast, sent ripples through boardrooms and break rooms alike. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. Days before the White House unveiled a sweeping new tariff package aimed at bolstering domestic manufacturing. Factories hadn't even absorbed the full impact of the policy, yet the fear was already palpable. Investment stalled, orders dwindled, and one of America's industrial titans, Ford Motor Company, began sliding toward crisis. This wasn't a market downturn or a misstep in corporate strategy. This was Washington turning up the heat, and the consequences are now unfolding in real time, raising a question that haunts every corner of the nation's industrial heartland. Can a policy designed to protect American manufacturing end up breaking it from the inside out? Ford's troubles began quietly, with no fanfare or flashing headlines. Deep in an earnings call, 5 understated words slipped out. "We are suspending our guidance." For Wall Street, it was a red flag waved in the face of investors accustomed to predictability. For Main Street, the fallout would arrive later, in the form of strained paychecks, rising prices, and broken promises. Ford had entered 2025 with cautious optimism, projecting profits between $7 billion and $8.5 billion. But by July, the company slashed those expectations by $1.5 billion and told investors not to expect further updates. The numbers told a brutal story. Net income plummeted 64% in the first quarter, from $1.3 billion a year earlier to a mere $473 million. Revenue slid to $46 billion, a 5% drop that analysts at Morgan Stanley dubbed a strategic tremor, with the potential to fracture the company's long-term stability. After-hours trading saw Ford's shares tumble over 2%, erasing billions in market value. It wasn't panic. It was a recalibration of confidence, a crack in the foundation of an American icon. At the heart of this unraveling were the new tariffs, a 25% levy on imported light-duty vehicles meant to force companies to build more within U.S. borders. On paper, it was a bold move to revive domestic manufacturing. In practice, it exposed the fragility of a globalized supply chain built for efficiency, not nationalism. Ford's supply chain, like those of its peers, wasn't designed to bend to sudden policy shifts. 3 of its most popular models assembled in Mexico became too costly to import. The company faced a stark choice: raise prices and risk losing sales in a market already battered by inflation, or absorb the losses and watch margins erode. Ford chose the former, hiking prices on all 3 models, but the decision came with a cost. Sales projections darkened as consumers, already stretched thin, balked at the higher stickers. The tariffs' ripple effects didn't stop at the border. China, once a promising growth market for Ford's electric SUVs and performance sedans, retaliated with a punishing 145% tariff on American vehicle imports. Ford's response was swift and decisive. It pulled out. Export routes were suspended, launch plans frozen, and dealers in Shanghai and Beijing were left with inventory they couldn't sell. Inside the company, the mood shifted from ambition to survival. High-level meetings that once charted bold expansions now focused on damage control. Factories built for growth were told to pause, international hiring ground to a halt. One Ford executive, speaking anonymously to the Wall Street Journal, captured the surreal reversal. "We're not a startup, but right now we're operating like one, cutting, pivoting, reacting day by day." A century-old symbol of American ingenuity, reduced to watching spreadsheets by the hour, bracing for the next policy shock. This wasn't Ford's first crisis, but it was the first where Washington, not Detroit, seemed to hold the wheel. The road ahead is no longer paved with certainty. A single White House order can unravel years of meticulous planning. Global markets, once driven by performance and demand, now dance to the tune of politics. Ford isn't teetering on bankruptcy, but something deeper is fracturing. The belief that stability is possible when the rules shift overnight. The storm didn't spare Ford's rivals either. General Motors delayed its quarterly investor call, shelved a $4 billion stock buyback plan, and placed global expansion projects under review. Stellantis froze hiring across its North American plants and postponed equipment upgrades slated for late 2025. Toyota, the Japanese giant, paused capital investments in its Kentucky and Ontario facilities, citing supply chain uncertainty and shifting policy dynamics. Behind closed doors, the message was unanimous. Don't bet on anything, not this quarter, maybe not this year. The tremors reached beyond corporate headquarters, shaking the lives of workers and communities. In Ingersoll, Ontario, union leaders delivered a grim warning to Canadian auto workers: postpone major purchases, avoid new loans, brace for factory shutdowns with little notice. The warning proved prescient. In early July, multiple Canadian plants halted production lines without fanfare. A Ford facility in Oakville sent workers home indefinitely, while another in Windsor switched to half capacity, slashing overtime. The term whispered in lunchrooms wasn't restructuring, but survival mode. These plants weren't failing because of poor performance. They were simply on the wrong side of a newly hardened border. For decades, North America's auto industry thrived on integration, shared parts, logistics, and talent weaving a seamless production network. Now, those invisible lines are becoming barriers, splitting allies, and reshaping an industry overnight. The United Auto Workers, UAW, in the U.S. stood firm, with President Shawn Fain calling the tariffs a long overdue correction after years of factory closures in places like Lordstown, Ohio. He evoked the ghosts of shuttered plants, framing the policy as a lifeline for American workers. But in Canada, labor leaders were livid. The same tariffs that sparked hope south of the border were pushing Canadian families to the brink. The North American Labor Alliance, once a united front, began to splinter. In one tense meeting, a Canadian union representative reportedly walked out after a UAW spokesperson dismissed the tariffs' collateral damage as necessary losses. That phrase, necessary losses, has since reverberated across Ontario's radio call-ins and Reddit threads, carrying a bitterness that no policy paper can capture. For a second-shift worker in Windsor, macroeconomic adjustments are cold comfort when overtime vanishes and summer camp for her child gets cancelled. She doesn't care about trade balances, she cares whether her car payment clears in August. Corporate leaders, meanwhile, are grappling with their own disorientation. They built strategies on the assumption that North America would remain a single, integrated production zone. Now they're drafting contingency plans that feel like relics of a bygone era, marking red lines across trade zones, rewriting supplier contracts, and rerouting components. One Stellantis executive, speaking anonymously to the Financial Times, summed up the chaos. It's not just the tariffs, it's the tone. Every week feels like another unpredictable turn. The old models no longer apply. Supply chains that once spanned continents with surgical precision are now battlegrounds of shipment delays, cost overruns, and plant rumors. A quiet panic has taken hold, not just in union halls or executive suites, but across an industry that spent decades building a system now being unraveled by political force. The irony is stark. For years, automakers like Ford, GM, and Stellantis preached a singular vision. Electric vehicles, EVs, are the future, cleaner, smarter, and essential to meeting climate goals by 2030. That future now faces a blockade, not from competitors or market failures, but from policy. At the core of every EV, whether built in Michigan or Mexico, is a battery, a motor, a semiconductor. Most of those components come from Asia. China dominates lithium-ion battery production. Japan supplies motors. Taiwan and South Korea control chips. Every shipment, every contract is now under the shadow of new tariffs. The result? Higher costs, delays, and cancellations. Ford had planned to launch 2 new EV models in 2026, one for the US market, another for export. Now, insiders say both programs are frozen. A supplier in Mexico, already paid to begin motor assembly, is stuck in limbo, its down payments locked in uncertainty. The fallout extends beyond parts. Public-private partnerships for EV charging stations are stalling. Utility companies, wary of unclear timelines, hesitate to build new grid infrastructure. Battery plant investments in Ontario, Michigan, and Tennessee have slowed as investors grapple with an unanswerable question: what will an EV cost 6 months from now? Some are whispering the unthinkable. EVs are becoming luxury products again, not because of corporate greed, but because of risk. If tariffs inflate battery and chip prices, automakers will pass those costs to consumers. A mass-market EV priced at $32,000 could balloon to $42,000 or more, locking out middle-class buyers overnight. Tax credits and subsidies, once touted as solutions, lose their power when fewer models qualify or upfront costs soar. The result is a two-tiered market where the wealthy go green, and everyone else stays tethered to gas pumps. This contradiction cuts deep. A policy sold as protection for American workers is making it harder for American families to afford American innovation. A move meant to bring jobs home may be pushing green technology out of reach. As the world races toward decarbonization, the U.S. risks falling behind, not for lack of engineering, but for lack of coordination. Inside Ford's innovation labs, engineers aren't short on vision. They have the tools, the demand, and the talent. What they lack is stability. One lead designer speaking off the record to Wired put it bluntly, "We have everything we need except certainty." That uncertainty isn't just stalling vehicles, it's slowing an entire climate strategy. Every delayed model, every canceled launch, every missed deadline adds up, not in dollars but in carbon emissions, lost momentum, and diminished global credibility. The harder truth is that the policy meant to secure America's future may be costing it the very future it aimed to build. Ford's story is just one thread in a larger tapestry, a collision between economic nationalism and the global systems that have defined industry for decades. An auto sector once optimized for cost and speed is now navigating political shockwaves, forced to redraw its map on the fly. The deeper question is whether America can protect its jobs and embrace a green future without dismantling the supply chains that make both possible. If this crisis forces North America to build cleaner, more resilient production networks, it could be a turning point. But the path won't be quick, easy, or cheap. It demands years of coordination between governments, companies, and communities. It requires reinvestment in infrastructure, a rethinking of old assumptions, and the slow rebuilding of trust across borders that no longer feel open. The stakes are higher than factory floors or stock prices. This is about who shapes the next economy and who gets left behind if we falter. For the worker in Windsor, the engineer in Michigan, the dealer in Beijing, and the family eyeing an EV they can no longer afford, the consequences are personal. What's unraveling isn't just supply chains. It's the illusion that stability, progress, and prosperity were ever guaranteed. The road ahead demands more than policy tweaks or corporate pivots. It requires a vision bold enough to bridge borders, unite workers, and deliver a future where protectionism doesn't come at the cost of progress. Until then, the tremors will continue, and the question will linger. Can America rebuild what it's breaking before it's too late?